Well, I am so grateful to be back again at City Center. I really appreciate everyone that's listening. We're going to talk about depression today, which is not exactly the lightest conversation, I know, but it's really important. So, before we actually get into it, let me just give you an overview of what I'm going to touch on because depression is this massive topic, and I'm going to keep it to just three things today. And the first thing I'm going to touch on is how depression actually affects our thinking. And then we're going to go into some practical tips of how to help yourself if you're dealing with depression. And then we're going to end on how do I actually help somebody I know who's going through depression? What's my role? So before we get into any of the actual meat of this, I want to take a minute and just tell you who I am and why am I talking to you guys about depression. So my name is Danielle Fitch, and some of you might have seen me on here before. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work here in the East Bay, and I'm actually married to Justin Fitch, who works at City Center. So those of you that know him, you're welcome. Okay, so obviously, on a day-to-day basis, I deal with depression. I'm walking with people through their stories of how it affects them, helping them understand it. I am walking with them of how to actually day-to-day deal with the actual symptoms of depression, but also just giving them a chance to feel supported and understood. But long before I was a therapist, I was actually on the other side of the couch. And so without going into too much detail, I want to just help you understand why this topic is so dear to my heart. I grew up in a home that was, I guess the best way you could describe it was unhappy, but it wasn't until I was in my 20s and I went to therapy and somebody actually helped me understand that what I dealt with was trauma. And when you grow up in it and no one actually names it for you, you don't really know that it's anything other than this is just my day to day, this is my normal. But once I was in my 20s and a therapist actually told me that I lived in a day-to-day traumatic household, everything started to click. Growing up in a traumatic household, though, you naturally just figure out ways to survive. And at a certain point, those survival mechanisms can turn into ways of just trying to cope with life. And for me, one of the biggest ways I learned to cope was I just shut down. And so very quickly, my trauma turned to depression. But nobody went up to me and said, hey, you're dealing with trauma and now you're dealing with depression. So instead, it becomes your normal. And I'm almost guaranteeing that there's somebody else out there that can understand that sometimes when you grow up with trauma, when you grow up with abuse, when you grow up with depression, but it's all you know, it doesn't occur to you that something out there could be different. You wake up every day and think that this brokenness is something within me, or this brokenness is simply how every family exists. And so that depression carried with me throughout my life, and I spiraled down into it. And it wasn't until I hit the absolute rock bottom that God did this really amazing thing, which is sometimes when you're at the bottom, that's actually when you know that the thing that you need most is God, because that's all you have in that moment. And he landed me in front of an incredible therapist who named things like trauma, who named things like depression, who helped me understand how my story actually wasn't something that I created. I did not create my trauma. I did not wake up one day and just decide to be depressed. And the things I was doing to survive it was exactly that. It was survival. And so depression was always something that was so misunderstood that it led to actually something that I really want to address first, which is this idea of shame. When you grow up in a Christian household, or what is perceived to be a Christian household, a lot of the messages that you see around mental health are very confusing. And so for me, I was constantly told things like, just pray, have more faith, ask for help and you'll get it. Things like mental health were not even named. Things like depression weren't really acknowledged. It was just, you feel bad, so maybe you should pray, or maybe there's something that you're doing. And then it starts to become really confusing when you pray and nothing happens. And so shame enters in. And for a lot of you, probably like me, I experienced a deep amount of shame around my depression because I kept thinking I must be broken. There must be something wrong with me. Maybe God doesn't care about me. Am I praying wrong? Do I not have enough faith? Am I sinning in some way that's why God is not taking this away? And so that shame also keeps you from not only having a distorted view of God, it gives you a distorted view of your mental health, and then you don't ask for help. That shame actually keeps you from getting the help that you need. And so if anybody out there is experiencing shame, just want you to know that, number one, I know I'm not a pastor, but I know for a fact that not is rooted in truth at all. And also, don't let shame be the thing that keeps you from asking for help. The second thing that I experienced a lot of with my depression was a sense of hopelessness. And just to kind of back up, I think it's really important to understand that depression does this really frustrating thing where it messes with your head. And what we say in therapy is it creates a cognitive distortion. And so the way it actually distorts your thinking is it creates this really polarized, like black and white way of looking at your circumstances and looking at yourself. So one of the first things that does is, maybe I'm going to give you some examples and let me know, maybe talk amongst yourself if this sounds familiar. Nothing I do is working. Things are not changing. What's the point in trying? Something must just be wrong with me. Nothing I do helps. I'm not capable. Healing isn't happening. I might as well give up. If you've experienced any of those thoughts, those are actually distorted ways of thinking that comes out of our depression. So that point of just wanting to give up because you feel like nothing is working, that sense of hopelessness, it's so normal in depression. And I know that saying that that's normal doesn't take anything away, but it's really important to understand that depression distorts our rational thinking. And it tells us things are true when they're not. It tells us to look at the world and ourselves in very black and white terms. Either I pray and if nothing happens, something must be wrong with me, or I go to therapy once and I don't feel better, therefore it doesn't work. It creates very black and white ways of looking at things. So that's the first thing that depression does, is it distorts our thinking. So shame, hopelessness, those were probably the two biggest things that I know I experienced. And so again, I just want to validate anyone out there that if you're experiencing that, you're not alone. So let's actually go into, so where do you go from there? I think the biggest question that I get asked when people come into the room is, when will this go away? And I'm going to tell you something that I know is not easy to hear, but it's really important. And it's actually one of my last points, but I want to move it up to the front and reiterate, healing takes time. Healing doesn't happen once or twice. It is a continuous thing that you will experience. Something I've talked about here before actually is that word healing actually means the process of becoming. And so when it comes to our healing, we can't think of it as a one-time thing. Healing is something that for as long as there is breath in your lungs, you will be experiencing healing throughout your life. I, to this day, am still experiencing layers of my own healing. So healing takes time. But in a practical sense, let's start with, what is the first thing you do if you think that you are dealing with depression? Well, the first thing is ask for help. And that can come in two ways. One, probably the most important, is ask for professional help. And I promise this is not a plug for therapy, even though obviously I'm a huge advocate for it. But asking for professional help is so important, because I will tell you, it wasn't until I sat across from someone that could actually name for me, here's what's happening. Here's how it affects your brain, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, that I was able to actually understand what was going on. And then I was given the tools of what I needed to do to, on a day-to-day basis, recognize it and manage it. So having that professional help as a support, but also just as insight, is one of the most important things. Asking for help can also look like connecting with people. So my second point is, don't isolate. And these two kind of go hand in hand. So it's really, really, really easy when you're feeling depressed to isolate, to shut down, and to spiral into yourself. But I will tell you that depression feeds on isolation. It grows in the darkness. And so the best thing that we can do is do what we say in therapy, which is do the opposite of what the depression is telling you. If it's telling you to shut down and isolate, you call somebody Go on a walk, meet them for coffee, go sit in a park somewhere and just be around other human beings. Lean on your existing relationships. Don't mistake them for your therapist. It's not fair to put on to them the work that a therapist can do, but let them be a support to you. Don't isolate. Next is kind of a big one, and I'm going to try to break it down as much as I can, but it's this idea of a mental health checklist. So the best way I can describe it is this. We all have things that I like to break into categories that are just our day-to-day mental well-being, our physical, mental, emotional, and then I would throw on spiritual and relational. These different categories of our life all feed off of each other and make up our mental and emotional well-being. So if you feel like you are dealing with depression, I always tell my clients, start by doing a little mental health checklist. And I say check in by compartments. How am I doing physically? How am I doing emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationally? So questions like, am I sleeping? Am I eating? Am I exercising? Am I drinking water? Am I connecting with other human beings? Am I tapping into my faith? If the answer to any of those is ever no, then pause and recognize that I am not taking care of my well-being overall, and I need to tend to those areas. When we are not tending to each of those areas on a regular basis, what happens is our defenses are down. When your defenses are down, it's really easy to spiral into a depression. So just get really good. Even if you're not, by the way, in the throes of depression, this is kind of just a good rule of thumb, is how often are you actually checking in with your mental and emotional well-being? So the next thing on the list, I want to just take like 30 seconds and tell you that depression is not just about feelings. There's some actual very real brain stuff happening. So if it helps, I'm going to speak in terms of brain for a second. When we deal with depression, one of the first things that happens is our brain gets flooded with cortisol levels, and that's our stress hormone. And the minute our stress levels go up and our brain gets flooded with cortisol, there's a few different neurotransmitters that deeply get affected, and 3 in particular. That's our dopamine and our serotonin and our endorphins. Our dopamine is that reward chemical. So if you feel like you're dealing with depression, a good life hack for your brain is do something that makes you check that little reward box. Create small manageable tasks and accomplish them, and you feel really good about yourself. That's a great way to get some dopamine into your brain. Also, another great thing to do is try something that challenges you. Forcing your brain to actually do work and then accomplish it, again, will flood your brain with dopamine. Serotonin is actually our mood stabilizer. So get out and get some sunlight. Do something that brings you a sense of joy, a sense of peace. Help stabilize that mood. And then the last one is endorphins, which is kind of like the feel-good chemical. And so go on a run, get some exercise, do something nice for somebody else, do something that brings you joy. Okay, so that's just my little brain life hack for dealing with depression. Lastly, make sure that you're noticing if your thinking is going to that black and white place, and try to take a step back and have some perspective. Offer yourself a middle ground. If it wasn't so black and white, what would be a healthy, alternate perspective? Focus on purpose. Purpose is probably one of the most important things that you can do when you're dealing with any mental health issues. So finding things that bring you a sense of passion in life, something that gives you a point to wake up every day. Create a sense of purpose, whether it's in your art and creativity or whether it's in serving others, or maybe it's your faith. But purpose actually helps us fight our depression. So this kind of leads to, what if I don't deal with depression myself, but I know somebody that is? Well, let me first and foremost tell you that just being a safe space is the best thing that you can do. So number one, listen. Be a safe space and just listen. Just reaching out and letting them know that you are a point of contact, just checking in with those text messages, not even to ask them, to share everything they're going through, but just them knowing that you are just there and that you are reaching out and that you're there to listen and be supportive. That is honestly the best thing you can do. But beyond that, for yourself, it's really important that you first recognize that depression is actually an illness. Very well-meaning people can go to very quick fixes and be dismissive of people's depression without meaning to. So saying things like, just pray more, or you're just having a bad day, or it'll pass, or somebody else has it worse. Recognize that they are not waking up every day and choosing to feel depressed. It's very real and it is an illness. The second thing on that is you should not be expected to be their main source of help or to be the person that fixes it. That's why encouraging them to get professional help is also an incredibly important thing. Encouraging them that they don't and shouldn't do this alone can be one of the most loving things that you can do. If they're scared of going to therapy, letting them know, I'm not going to leave you. I can be your support system. I can help you get connected to a therapist. I'm still here for you. I'm not going anywhere. But let's have somebody else join our team that can actually take on the heavy lifting. And then it's really important, by the way, to take thoughts of suicide seriously. So the minute somebody starts talking about suicide, it's easy to dismiss or tell them that their thoughts are not actually about suicide. Take it seriously. Get them help. Make sure that you're acquainted with hotlines. Make sure that they know and have healthy ways of reaching out if they ever actually do get to that point of struggling with suicidal thoughts. And then lastly, make sure that you're practicing self-care. It's a lot to even just walk alongside of somebody that's going through depression. It's heavy, it's hard. And when you love somebody, you want to take that on. But at a certain point, you start to feel like, I don't know how to do this anymore. It's too much. So make sure that you have healthy boundaries and that you're actually taking care of yourself. We don't need both of you drowning at the same time. So remember, encourage help, create healthy boundaries, just be a safe space. And for those of you that are dealing with depression, remember, ask for help, do mental health daily check-ins, notice that black and white thinking, and remember that healing takes time. I can tell you from being on both sides of the couch that not only is this real, but man, have I seen healing be an incredible thing that happens in and out of therapy. And so I can definitely tell you, as somebody who works with people who deal with depression and as somebody who has dealt with it and found healing throughout her life, that it is a journey, but it's really possible. So that's all I have for you today, but I really hope that you guys got something out of this.